Hi, welcome to the Voyage Clinics podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Sanders, family physician. And today we have a special guest, Matt Webster. He's hanging with us today. Matt, tell us a little bit about your credentials. Tell us who you are and what brings you here.
Yeah, well, as you know, Matthew Webster, I have a master's in psychology. And my credentials are super important, but also my qualifications are important.
I like that.
And I always talk about what qualifies us is way more valid for us as individuals than what certifies us. And that is my life is qualification, right? And the reason I got into psychology, the reason I care about mental health, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness is because a lifetime of what I call, like regurgitated or reincarnated trauma led me down a path where I saw not only who I was, but who others were and valued them even more on a deeper level. And so I decided to navigate my childhood sexual abuse that happened to me, my body dysmorphia that happened, rejection from religious culture that happened, a marriage and a divorce that happened. I started to navigate that in a very holistic way and recognize the physical impact those things had because of my mental and emotional state.
Matt is a good friend, and thank you for joining me today. I am honored to hear your journey story, and we're pickleball bros too, and
we are.
And so we've known each other for quite some time, and I wanted to, I've been a witness to your journey to some degree, and I think of the Voyage Clinics podcast, our objective is really just to help people and communities and families and educate and about healthcare topics. I mean, we've had like general surgeons on here, we've had endocrinologists on, and we've had psychologists on, we've had all kinds of different folks. And I really want to have you on here because I think your journey is so unique, and it's also not unique. And there are many people who have very similar stories and very similar things that they undergo, maybe not to the degree that you have, but it's neat to see some similarities in different people's lives. And I'm not from Utah. I grew up in a mining town in Nevada, and there are just unique cultures here that I think I've seen a lot of trauma here: spiritual trauma, emotional trauma, sexual trauma, physical trauma, and I don't know if it's because of where we're at in the world or what, or maybe we're just more aware here, but. I'm sure it happened, in my residency, and I trained in like Jacksonville, Florida. I did medical school in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm sure there was plenty of all kinds of things going on down there too. I think now I'm just more socially aware, plugged into a lot of it. But even my patients are, and it's a good thing. I think they're more aware of some of the trauma that's going on in their lives and trying to process through that. And if you will, maybe talk to us unpack a little bit about your journey, and as much as you are comfortable with or talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I call it my real journey, started about 3.5 years ago. And again, we know each other personally. So I went through a pretty awful situation in divorce.
Yes.
And it was that forced me to say, why am I having this reincarnation of this trauma in my life? And why is it happening in cycles? And I don't understand it. And I was really frustrated because I've worked at a mental health facility before. And I've been around psychologists. I've been around therapists.
Yeah.
I've been around great case managers. And yet in my own life, I had to start saying, why is this pattern happening? Why is it cycling through? So I went through that divorce. And that's when I really started exploring my childhood. And I did what a lot of people call child work. So I went back in meditations, in therapies, and I started healing those selves, healing that child at 7, 8, and 9 years old who went through abuse, and then healing that 11, 12-year-old version who started to recognize himself as a dude who could just be funny and big, and no one would say anything. And my mental programming, this belief I had, was as a result of abuse, that I was unlovable. And so I attached myself to what the world would believe is unlovable. This image of a big dude who doesn't have to have physical intimacy, who doesn't have to have really emotional awareness. He can just be funny. You can walk into a room and that's who I was. And I lived it out perfectly on the outside, right? And then this 3.5 years ago, when I did this childcare, when I went back and took care of myself, I went to those same spots the abuse happened. I went to the home that it happened at. I resolved it emotionally, mentally. And I gave myself permission to free that child from that experience, free that 11, 12-year-old from this decision to be big, to be funny, that led to depression. And then it led to rejection from a mission opportunity in Utah, right? I was rejected from that. And so I did a lot of that work. And as I thought those were the main things. And then all of a sudden I got into my 20s as I went back in these meditations.
I want to pause you for a minute because I think it's so beautiful to unpack our trauma, unpack our emotions, and see clearly, are there emotional processing? Like you said, I believed from my previous trauma as a young child, my sexual trauma, I was unlovable.
Yeah.
And that is often the case when I see folks with sexual trauma a lot. And they have this stigma about themselves that because of this abuse, therefore I am XYZ. And boy, is it unhealthy. And how beautiful it is to see your evolution we're all beautiful emotionally creatures. We're all beautifully broken. We all have things that we're working on. And to bring awareness to that space, to discover, to look inward and just discover, wow, here's a pattern in my life that I'd like to disrupt and I'd like to change it. And I have to probably unravel some of the dialogue, some of the beliefs that I have about myself. I recently had a similar experience in my own life. I grew up in a home where my father was very, I don't know, he's an alcoholic. Sometimes he was a great guy to be around. Sometimes he wasn't. And I just saw the way he lived his life and the things that he taught me as a young man, how to be a parent, how to be a man, how to be a husband. And I watched him go through a divorce and my mom and then another divorce. And he was just, he was kind of mean. He was kind of hard to be around. And he was constantly angry if it didn't go just so. And I didn't realize I was that to a degree. And I had to bring awareness to that space. And I had to say, well, I don't want to lose all the people around me that I love, right? And I noticed my kids getting whoa, Dad, that might have been over the top, right? Anger wise and so I had to unpack that and say, maybe the way that I have been, maybe the way that I am thinking is not correct. And that just talks to our first point, which is just the emotional intelligence, which to just be able to pull away from your situation and look at the 10,000 foot view
right.
and say, what are my next 10 years going to look like? Do I want this cycle to repeat? Do I want to lose my kids, my wife, and be estranged from them because I'm an old grouchy bastard? Maybe I don't want that. And so maybe the way that I think, maybe the programming that I have, which is I have to shore up everybody around me in a pretty strong way, maybe that's not correct. Maybe it's not my job. And maybe I can just see them and love them. And so I've done some really neat emotional work personally, and I've noticed my wife is like, hey, you're not such a dick. Good job.
Well done.
And I'm like, well, I'm trying. I still fail sometimes. But my kids, my connections with them are better. And it's all because of a deep-rooted, it was so deep. And even now as I say it, I sometimes disbelieve, there's no way you reworked that, and I still get a little bit upset and I feel it. And then I'm like, no, be aware what's going on here. And I just think that emotional intelligence journey is so, so important for all of us to spend time with introspection, spend time with extrospection, pull way out to the 10,000 foot view. look at your scenario, look at your emotions, look at your life, and decide, is this going in a good direction? And is there some emotional processing that I need to look at, recognize? Is there a dialogue that's deep in my brain that says, you should XYZ, or you're not worthy, or you're not lovable, or you're, and they're deep, they're heavy, and it's super
deep.
hard, super hard.
And a lot of people will struggle to even get there because they don't have others around them who will let them get there. Right? That's why therapy and seeing a psychologist and seeing a doctor, these things are important because you need listening ears.
Unpack that for a minute. Some people get stuck in those spaces because those that we surround ourselves don't let us get there. Explain that.
Well, especially in this community, right? We're taught be self-reliant, stand up, put your back up, stick it through, endure to the end. And yet, in reality, we're meant to be connected with others. We're meant to have social connection, emotional connection, psychological connection. And so if you're taught from an early age, doesn't matter what age it is, but typically from 0 to 9 is where you learn most of your programming. And then you learn additional things into the teens. But if you're taught, and we are taught this in this culture, unfortunately, that you're not allowed to express certain things because they go against the norm. You're not allowed to feel certain things because they go against the norm. Then you don't want to express it. You don't want to say it out loud, and then you repress it. And so when you repress, not only are you psychologically going solo, but then you have a barrier, an energetic barrier that prevents you from connecting to others. So a lot of people won't even see a therapist until they have a crisis.
Yeah.
They won't even be willing to be like, I'm in pain emotionally until something triggers it. And I saw that working at a mental health facility where I was on a crisis unit. And it wasn't until crisis happened that people started talking about what was going on.
Yeah.
And we should have preventative care. You're a preventative care doctor. And we should have preventative care in mental and emotional health, spiritual health. But we don't, because we feel like it's either invalid. You can't see the brokenness, but you can see a broken bone. Right? You can see those things. And I think we need to work on that connection and to recognize there's safe spaces, there's safe people to be around, and they don't necessarily have to be the highest educated or the most qualified, but they just have to be able to listen sometimes.
This is so powerful. And I just wanted to pin this point because, so I listen to Huberman Lab's podcast. I like those guys. I think he's super nerdy like me. He's like med school professor at, anyway, we both love education. We both love science. We both love teaching. He did a really beautiful podcast on emotional intelligence, and Mark Brackett, Dr. Mark Brackett, PhD psychology at Yale University. He's a professor there. And he's also the head of like the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence. He's a cool guy. And he was talking about his uncle who, when he was processing emotions as a young person, his uncle was this person who he could unpack emotions to. And the uncle was like nonjudgmental, just loving and kind and just listened. And this is what I'm hearing from you is that if we're in an environment where we don't feel comfortable unpacking our emotions because of societal judgment or judgment of others around us, or we just don't feel safe to do that because of cultural pressures, I think that is a terrible tragedy. Everyone needs a friend. Preventative mental health is just true, connected, non-judgmental, loving friendship.
It is.
If we can just unpack with somebody, hey man, I had the crappiest day. This and this and that happened, and this and this and this. And your friend is not trying to, oh, well, you should this and should that. No, you just say, wow, that sounds really hard. I believe you.
Yeah.
Right? And that's enough. That is enough. I think I need to be better at this. Emotional intelligence, emotional validation, about 5 years ago, my wife come to me and she says, hey, you suck at this. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know what emotional validation means. I grew up in a family where there was almost zero emotional validation. Right. my dad's like, suck it up, little camper, let's go. And if you got out of line, you want to cry, I'm going to whip you if you're going to cry too much. And so you just got to like, well, what? Like, okay, this is. So I was patterned into this way where I'm like, hey, it's okay, let's move forward. And that's not a bad thing, but it is possibly a better thing to just hold space with someone who's struggling with some emotional things. And I always thought it was like, what am I, just like enabling my children to be pansies? And because in my naivete toward emotional intelligence, I just didn't understand what's my objective here, babe? Like, what, you want me to coddle these little wieners? Like, no, I'm gonna,
toughen
step up and they're gonna be better. And so I think there is a balance there. And as parents, if you're, helping your children with emotional intelligence, I think there is a part of being a sturdy parent, also taken from Huberman Lab's podcast on parenting, which is wonderful. That was a beautiful podcast too. But you can still be really sturdy and help your kids be sturdy and tough and all those things, but still not suck at emotional validation. So I just wanted to take a minute to dissect that piece that you said, because it was profound, that you felt you were sometimes we're in an environment where we can't really unpack our emotions, and we can't really process them because we can't unpack them. We can't even talk about them because we feel judged or like pressures to not even go there. That's tough.
That is tough. And mine might have been different in some ways from some people, because mine was a threat from one of my abusers. And it was, if you tell, this will be the consequence, right? And so beyond the feelings I was having about the situation.
Oh yeah, you had a threat.
It was a physical threat, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes another psychological barrier.
Totally.
And we don't know what psychological barriers people have when we're interacting with them. But if we can just, like you're saying, be present with them, it might help them jump that hurdle of that barrier. It might help them do some pretty phenomenal things in their own life if you're just able to listen.
My invite to our listeners is to just start getting good at listening in a non-judgmental way. Strip away all the coulds and shoulds from your thought process as you connect with somebody, and intend to just hear their heart and cherish that pearl that they're sharing with you, and thank them after they share with you, and say two things: I believe you, and thank you for sharing with me. And that's it. Don't say anything else. Like I had to work super hard at being better at that. I'm still not perfect, but I'm getting better.
Yeah.
That's my invite to our team and our people that are listening. Get good at that. I believe you. Thank you so much for sharing these things. They're hard. I bet that was hard to share.
Yeah. And so many people need that. Exactly. Those two things could change someone's whole course of life. When I think about, I went to take my life after the divorce, and it was someone who just simply listened. That was it. He didn't even know what was going on. He gave me a phone call, and it wasn't even like, how are you doing? It was like, what's going on with you? It wasn't even that, classic question of, how are you doing today? It was just, what's going on with you? And I unpacked, and he just said, Matt, that sounds tough. And he gave me one piece of advice, which I took and I ran with, and that is, rejection is God's protection.
Yeah.
And I just ran with it. And he listened. And that was the biggest change in my whole life. It was like 34 years of traumatic experiences. And finally, there's someone who just listened and let me say it without judgment, without bias. And it was pretty phenomenal to feel that, and to feel that change of energy in myself. I remembered I was in a hotel room and ready to just go. And I told him on the phone as it was happening, I said, the room just went light. Like everything, my heart was in a million pieces. Everything just soaked right back up. And I was at peace.
Wow.
I just felt that gave me permission for the first time. Someone heard everything, and they didn't judge, and I didn't have guilt, and I didn't have shame. And I allowed myself to step forward into light and to love and to receive. And I think that's the biggest hurdle we have, is being vulnerable enough that we can step forward and receive. Because we've been disappointed so many times when we tried to step forward and the person didn't receive us. Like you're saying, they gave us exactly what we needed, the advice we needed, but they didn't just receive us. And so if we can receive, it changes the whole world.
What a powerful, powerful experience. And I mean, that must have been really, really dark and really, really hard. But then to just have someone who non-judgmentally allows you to unpack with them and just share space with you. And I mean, I think that's true friendship. I think that's a real friend. And, you know, we're kind of like here on this earth to do a few things, right? One of them is really just to connect with each other and to develop non-judgmental, loving friendships. And how good are we at that? I think it's worth looking at. Like, how threatened do my friends feel around me?
Yeah.
Do they feel in any way judged? Do they feel comfortable unpacking stuff to me? How deep a conversation have I had with those around me, including family members? Have we been able to get past the surface, the surface level of, hey, how's it going? Good. I'm good. Okay, cool. Okay, see ya. Bye.
Yeah.
Are we doing that with our kids? Are we helping them unpack in a way? Are we showing our kids our vulnerability so that they can then be vulnerable with us? That's something that I've been working on for some time as well. I started cursing with my children more. Not like cursing at them, because that would be the opposite effect, but cursing with them. And it's funny, it sounds so dumb, but it's kind of like, hey, look, Dad is like a mere mortal. Like, he's super, what? Like, so it just puts a little quirk in their brains.
Yep.
And I was like prompted to do this, by the way. I don't usually curse that much, but I trained I grew up in a small mining town, and I've worked construction and I trained at a Jewish medical school in South Florida. That's like, the sixth borough for the New York areas, it's so like, F-bombs are colloquialism there. So I just started like, in a loving, kind way. And it sounds so funny, but like adding some of that colorful speech to the conversations here and there. And at first they were like, what's going on, Dad? That was not
a midlife crisis.
That was not worthy of a curse word. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm just mortal like you guys. Is that cool? Is that all right? And it just gave them kind of permission to be mortal and be okay. And we get a lot of be perfect like pressures, right? And I was just like, maybe it was a prompting to deliberately be imperfect in front of my teenagers, just to let them like breathe, just breathe.
And it's powerful for your kids to witness it. And it's powerful for you to release even some of the anxiety that you're physically holding in your body of not being able to be with your kids in those kind of intimate moments where they feel human, right? Because I think to my parents, I knew stories about my mom's childhood. I knew stories about things that she did because she was very vulnerable about some of those. And so it allowed me to at least feel there was some safety in my home, though I didn't express everything that happened because of that physical threat. There was still a space where I saw my brothers be able to express things, my sister be able to express things. And it was pretty cool to witness that because I had a parent who was vulnerable. And when you do that and you create that vulnerability, you're talking about humanness. And when you bring the level of humanity into a relationship, all of a sudden you strip away bias, you strip away judgment, you strip away expectations. And you just say, this person's having a human experience and I can honor it because it's swearing, cursing. It's like, hey, sometimes that does come out in your head, even if you don't say it out loud. And so your kids are able to say, wow, Dad understands, he relates to us. And how many parents are willing to do that to their kids? How many parents are willing to tell their kid, hey, when I was 16 years old, I snuck out of the house, I made out with this whatever, and I made a dumb mistake. How many parents are willing to have those conversations, and not in a conversation like, don't go do this, but like, that was my human experience. Yeah. In fact, I just had, today had a moment to talk to my mom, and she was telling a story about her teenage experiences to a friend of mine. And watching him respond to her was pretty cool because he got to see, here's someone who's in her 70s relating to me in my 20s about her experiences, and there's no judgment. There's no need to even bring that judgment up because every one of us is going to live the life that we're designed for, and that we can then hopefully have the tools as we get older to emotionally process it and help others feel valid when they have experiences.
The opposite of vulnerability is like social media, because it creates like this like false reality. Everyone else is so perfect. I am not perfect, therefore I am less than. And or envy, creating a ton of envy about everyone else's beautiful, perfect lives, and look at these perfect pictures and look at all this stuff. So fascinating. My daughter created a channel called Papa Juan Sanders, I think, Papa Juan. And it was just a channel of me doing ridiculous things. Like, I had no idea. I cut up a lot. I goof around in the family. And she'd have her phone out, and I wouldn't know she's filming. And she films this hilarious thing that I did, and it's so silly and so stupid. But I think for all of her friend group and all the people that, I don't know if it was a channel or what, but like on her social media, she put, Priya did her thing. And all of her friends loved it. And I think it's because here's a doctor in the community who's a total goofball and like super imperfect. I was like ridiculous stuff. And I'm like, baby, you shouldn't post that. And then after a while, I was like, actually, I'm okay being vulnerable. Yeah. I'm okay with all this silliness. And as long as it's not misconstrued as something wonky, but like for the most part, like I'm like, that's beautiful, Priya. And I think it really helped her friend group really just breathe as well. Yeah. We need tools to help us with our own, I don't know, I think we need to see vulnerability around us as our teenagers need to see that so that they're comfortable unpacking some of their more vulnerable spaces and some of their more vulnerable emotions. We had a family devotional the other day, and my wife, Shauna, she unpacked some beautiful like childhood vulnerability things. And we were talking about self-love, and we were talking about how important it is to just establish that like relationship with yourself where you love yourself and you see yourself as worthy, or as, without shame and guilt. You just love yourself. Like, yeah, God loves me. I love me. Mom and dad love me. Like, I can love me. And so we literally, both my kids that are still home, we just kind of talked about it. And Shauna shared with us that this is something that she struggled with since she was younger. She developed an emotional programming that was, you are unlovable or less than. And then that just stuck with her for years and years and years. And she said, and it was so beautiful for my daughter, Arlie, to sit there and watch mom say, this is something that I still sometimes struggle with. And it makes me feel, sad or I struggle with it. And I just think that's so neat that she is confident enough to be vulnerable with my kids. And after the devotion, I remember my kids, like, I don't know, they commented in, nice Devo, Dad, nice Devo. And, I'm like, that's so cute. I love it. But I think it was because my wife's vulnerability that created that environment where they were like, oh, this is cool.
Well, emotions, I wish more people understood this. I teach it a lot when I'm working with people, is emotions themselves, they have a vibrational frequency. So when it's released, when you release an emotion, there's potentially you could look at it two ways. They're constructive, they're building upon something, or they're somewhat destructive emotions. And so in that moment, she's releasing constructive emotions, and that vulnerability allows your kids to build on whatever they're feeling. It allows them to build and your home to feel lighter and happier and to say great Devo, right? Because they feel it. And now her vulnerability, which is an energetic exchange, is being received by them. And then all of a sudden, they don't even know what's happening in their body on atomic levels. They don't know that all of a sudden they're shifting to a higher state of emotional acceptance and intelligence. And so it's pretty powerful when you do that. And we don't even have to think about it scientifically. We just know how we feel. Your kids felt better afterward. Your home felt lighter afterward. You felt better after your wife shared. And that's what we should be able to do in our community. We should feel like, if I say something, I'm contributing. I'm helping construct something good. I'm not helping, or not even helping. I'm not destroying anything or being destructive. And so whether it's in home or in groups that you set up or even in your office, right? You want people to feel like they are there to progress. They are there to grow. They are there to get better. And so it's pretty powerful that vulnerability is the tool.
That's really cool.
It is.
You said something really cool about constructive or destructive, like ways of thinking or processing. Yeah. And I noticed this, and I couldn't put words to it. I just noticed, like, in life there are times when I'm cultivating or growing or building up those around me, and it's beautiful and it's fun. It's really satisfying. And then there are certain thought processes that could enter my mind that then become less productive, more critical, maybe more critical. Yeah. And then those on myself, on others, on etc. And then it just, it tears them down. Best example I can come up with is pickleball. Because, like, if you're a good pickleball partner, you're very much constructive. You're putting out good frequency. You're staying on this good vibe thing. Hey, good job. You're paddle tapping. You're hand slapping. Hey, you're good. If you get into the destructive frequency, your partner can really feel the weight of that, and it can really hurt them and really be challenged.
You know this, like I know this. Pickleball, you could be standing at the kitchen line and your partner's behind you, getting ready to return a serve, and you can feel already they don't want you touching the ball. Yeah. They're already annoyed with you. Or you can feel like there's confidence from them, and it shifts the way you behave. All of a sudden, you're more confident about the shots you're taking. You're more confident about that reaction. And so that exchange of that vibrational energy, that emotion, you feel it, and it doesn't even have to be verbal. It doesn't have to be physical, but you feel it. And I think people feel it every day. You have someone walk into your office, Dr. John, and you already have a connection with them because you can feel if they're going to be vulnerable. You can feel their energy. Is it low? Is it high? And that's partially related to physical pain. It's also related to the emotional pain going on in their life. And I say this all the time to clients. Imagine you're at a party and someone walks in, and someone you don't want to see. You felt the shift in energy when they walked in. Now at your same party, and someone you love and you're excited to see, they don't even have to say hi. You just see them through a window. You feel a shift in their energy, right? Because it is what's the most important part of our interaction, is what we're sending out. It doesn't have to be verbal. It doesn't have to be physical. What we're sending out from us, is it goodness, construction, or is it something bad, destruction? Mm-hmm. And you feel it. You do.
So in your journey, there were some stuckisms that you had to go back and heal and suture those wounds closed and heal them in, because if I'm pulling this all together correctly, I don't know. I'm not an expert in this space, but but those wounds and maybe some of those emotional dialogues that were or self-talk dialogues that were going on in you were continuing this trauma loop, this pattern of destruction, and maybe for my dad as well, like with his process of like being critical and all these things, and then he would lose all of it, the ones that loved him closest to him, and you could tolerate being around him for an hour, and that's max, and then you got to walk away and then just breathe, and then you can go back. But maybe some of that trauma and some of those emotional paradigms needed to be recognized and then disrupted. So I guess if we're feeling some destruction in our lives, whether it's self-destruction or destruction of those around us or destruction of relationships, how does one get to the space that you got to where and me too, frankly, where you're willing to look at it and say, oof, yeah, those things in my past, those ways of thinking about the things that happened to me in my past are creating some blockages in my progression here on this earth. And
Yeah.
and I need to go back and visit that and process it in a different, better way and recalibrate my emotions and thinking around those events so that I can bring more construction and life and growth into my light, into my life, as opposed to the destructive cycle that I'm seeing. I mean, how does one get there?
Well, I think mentally, how do you get there? There's a part of it. There's emotionally how you get there, and that is accepting discomfort is part of life. Because if I'm already uncomfortable with my circumstance, let's say going back to my personal reference, that divorce, I'm already uncomfortable with that. So why not go into some other discomfort? Why not go there and say, what is it about that other discomfort that I need to resolve? And I love this way you said, suture it up, because that's what you're doing. You're going back and you're addressing a wound that's never been properly healed.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to say, I'm willing to be uncomfortable because I'm already uncomfortable. And that discomfort, it's not going to take me into another dark place necessarily. What it's going to do is it's just going to be discomfort. So if you had to categorize it, you would just simply say, I'm either comfortable with something or I'm uncomfortable with something. And if I'm uncomfortable, it doesn't matter what level of discomfort it is, I'm willing to be there. And I think about it like this. I had a broken wrist when I was younger, and the doctor didn't really do a great job at making sure it healed up very
Those
well.
doctors, man.
Some doctors.
Rascals.
No, but what's funny is I slipped on ice and it happened. And then I got an x-ray on it. And this other doctor said to me, he's like, yeah, we could have done it differently. And he's like, yeah. He said, but if you break it again, we'll have a chance to fix it. And so I thought, there you go. I have to be in discomfort to have it fixed the right way. Right? So no matter what, either way, I'm going to be in discomfort.
Yeah.
I might as well be there and heal it instead of be there and be bitter or be there and try and avoid it. Because discomfort exists. But if you resolve it, all of a sudden, that discomfort has value and purpose. And if you can live a purposeful life, any more discomfort that's going to come, you have a way to navigate it quicker. Mm-hmm. And I think about processing emotions, and that term isn't one of my favorites, processing. Mm-hmm. I like to use the word progressing emotions because you're building something with that emotion. And so, yeah, I'm going to experience anger again, but how quickly am I in that anger period, right? Am I progressing through it quicker, or am I just processing it really slowly? And if I can progress it quicker, then I can get through the discomfort a lot faster and into a state of balance, a harmony, and bliss. And it's pretty cool where you can mentally do that, because right now, personally, I'm going through kidney transplant rejection, right? And it's tough. Back in March that started, but within 5 days, I was able to go through what they call the grief cycle, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. I was able to go through that and then say, no matter where this takes me, I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to be happy, and I'm going to find joy. Does that mean there's not days where I get frustrated? I'm in physical pain? Absolutely there are. But I don't have to spend as much time in that emotion of anger, of doubt, of grief. I can let myself progress through it and then move on to something that I want. And I think that's the reason we need people to be able to talk and be able to listen. Because if you can make that connection, you can progress through things, you're not going to spend 5-6 years in anger. Like you talk about your dad, I think about clients I've worked with, they've spent 4, 5, 6, 7 years in anger over a situation that happened. And because of that, all of a sudden, they've started introducing unhealthy behaviors into their life. Alcohol, pornography addiction, substance abuse. And they didn't intend to do that, but they didn't have a healthy way to progress that emotion. And so what happened was they just processed it, and the way they processed it was, okay, I'm going to have a drink. Okay, I'm going to, go to the computer. I'm going to be on social media. And it happens so often because they didn't feel safe enough early on when they started experiencing the emotion to be able to express it and make it work for them.
As a family doctor, a lot of people come to you with physical ailments, but a lot of people also they come to you with emotional, spiritual ailments, and they unpack them. And I don't know if they know that it's protected by patient privacy law or what, but they will just
Unload.
they unload. And it's been a real honor and a privilege to be a witness to their lives, to just listen and hear it and be there with them in some of those really poignant times. I've dealt with a lot of death, a lot of life, a lot of birth. I delivered babies for 10 years, and I worked in hospice for 4 years, and to just help people unpack some stuff is really an honor. One of the phrases I talk to my people who have undergone like the death of a loved one or a trauma or a thing, I say, well, let's just talk it through.
Yeah.
And I use that phrase a lot, and I don't know where it came from. I just started saying it, but let's talk it through. And after we talk it through, I thank them for sharing with me. And then I say to them, the more times you can talk it through to people that will love you and trust you and that won't judge you, but just be a listening ear, the more times you can talk it through, you'll process this better.
Yeah.
This trauma, one of my clients lost her father. It's super sad, and super great guy. Oh, awesome. And I don't know if it was good for both of us. It was definitely good for both of us just to talk it through, how hard that was for her, how hard that was for me. And to have that emotional connection in a loving, kind, like non-judgmental way. I think that is again, we're circling back on that, like just being a good listener and hearing and validating someone's life's journey or emotions and how powerful that can be to them. That's super, super beautiful.
You don't have to be an expert on listening, right? You just have to listen.
Yeah.
It's simple. And yet so many people think, I don't have the tools to help this person. No one's asking for your help if they're talking.
Yeah.
No one said, hey, I need you to do this. Sometimes they just want to listen. And that's one of the complications sometimes I run into with people is they say, well, I don't have the tool to help my child. I don't have the tool. And sometimes I'll have to tell them, that's not your job to carry around a tool bag to help your child through this emotional thing. It's your job just to listen. It's your job just to be available. And then they can and hopefully get to the right resources. You can guide them to the resources, or they can find the right resources, whether it's a therapist, like I say, a psychologist, sometimes it is a doctor who can listen. And we don't recognize also one of the things that's important that I realized is every time we have an emotion, we also feel it throughout our body. And so when you have a patient who comes in and they start unloading, unpacking things, they're also storing that within their body in different places, right? I mean, stress in the shoulders, lower back pain. A lot of these things can have an emotional element. And there's a psychology and physiology about it that we don't dive into on the science of it. But sometimes that's it too, is saying to somebody, where's that showing up in your body right now?
So for a long time, we didn't dive into it in the science, but now there's a whole space called functional neurological disorders that are very much emotional driven, physiologic responses that we have. They used to call them psychosomatic disorders. They've changed the name, thankfully. That's kind of a mean way to talk. You're a psychosomatic somaticizer. But they're super real, and definitely emotions can manifest physically, especially in the gut, but also everywhere in our bodies. I've seen rashes that come on from emotions. I've seen all kinds of stuff. So the importance of like recognizing them and then processing them. Sometimes we're in a heightened emotional state, we kind of lie to ourselves.
We do.
I know I do. I get mad and I'm like, I'm so mad because right? And then if I can just keep my cool and not like, don't lose a gasket there. Just keep your cool and just talk it through again, and then start to look at it. Mm-hmm. Maybe don't look at it right now. If we look at it right now in the height of our emotions, we often come to conclusions that those somewhat negative emotions want us to come to. And I don't know what that is, but like, oh, like this morning, something happened. I'm speaking at a conference this weekend, and there was a little snafu in the conference. And again, my programming, if things aren't just so, you get mad. And so I'm like, wow, why am I so frustrated right now? And well, it's because the process to sign up for this conference that I'm speaking at is somewhat broken. And I'm like, as immediately I start to think these negative thoughts, I'm like, well, these guys are so incompetent and this and this and that. And I can't believe this. It's like so inappropriate. Like this is conference holding 101 is having your sign up process dialed in, and I'm getting all
worked up.
But all of those thought processes, all of those were destructive thought processes, and they were all hurting me. And if I spoke under the influence of those destructive thought processes, they would hurt others. I could lash out with the most vitriol under that. I don't know what that is, that intoxicating thought that can really hurt people. So I was smart enough, emotionally intelligent enough to say, hey, I'm feeling frustrated. And I was like, hey, Shauna, can I just tell you how I'm feeling frustrated? She's like, sure. I'm feeling frustrated, blah, blah, blah. And she didn't unpack the why.
Yep.
But I told her, I said, my current why I'm frustrated is this. I'm mad because of incompetence and this and this and this. But let me just tell you the real reason why I'm frustrated. And I think this is like 2 layers deep on our emotional processing. Yeah. And we kind of suck at this, but at least I do. But like, the real reason I'm mad is not because these people are incompetent. It's not because they should be better. It's not because of all these things. That's just a lie. That creates more negativity. Yep. The real reason is because I love what I'm going to speak about, and I'm afraid that people won't come that I have invited to come.
Yeah.
Right?
How relieving is that?
Now that is so relieving for me, but then also I don't lash out under that thought process. So I don't know, this happens a lot, I think, in our emotional journeys where we're frustrated or we're depressed or we're anxious and we're thinking the reason why is because of X, Y, Z's. And I think it takes a minute to breathe and to maybe talk it through a few times with someone who's not going to try to fix it, but just listen to really get to and then just take a little minute to just consider that might not be true.
Right.
All those little thoughts that you had that were super negative and were creating so much more anger or more depression or more anxiety might not be true. Let's dig a little deeper and see if there's something else that's driving that. That's totally okay.
Yeah. And your desire to want people to hear this beautiful message you're going to share, your friends, that's all coming from a place of goodness.
Yeah.
And so in the end, that's where the emotion was. It was that you just wanted to have good come out. You wanted to be constructive. You wanted to build others up. And the frustration was, I might not be able to do it the way I think I can because of all these circumstances. But in reality, I talk about this with clients all the time. Worst case scenarios. Reality is that building you're going to do it in could start on fire, right? The day of. You might not be able to do it anyway. So we build these stories of incompetence. This is the reason. This is the reason. But at the core, it wasn't any of that. It was because you want people to hear this powerful message you're going to share, and you care about those people.
So as we're processing an emotion, consider if a thought enters your brain during processing that emotion, consider if it's positive or negative. Yep. Is it destructive or constructive? And if it's destructive, pause it. Pause it. Don't let it proliferate in your brain. Right. If you keep proliferating it in your brain, repeating it over and over and over, you just get more anger or more, and then your actions can be those destructive actions. Story. There's a doc that I worked with. So I was a medical director of a multi-specialty clinic, and we hired this general surgeon. And surgeons are, they're pretty assertive. They're they got language. It's this is culture. It's not appropriate. But things need to be done a certain way in the OR. And the OR is like, we have somebody's life on the table, and we have to be very meticulous, and it has to be very rigid. And it's it's a high intensity situation. Well, this surgeon, he's like throwing F-bombs all over, and he's upset because XYZ things are happening and they shouldn't be happening, etc. And the nurses or people or the folks that are involved, they get all offended and upset, and so he creates all this vitriol and all this stuff. And the administrator, talks to me like, "Hey, can you talk to him?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I speak Dr. Ease and I speak surgeon, and yeah, I do surgery too, and I understand what he's going through." So we sat down and we talked it through. And the thing that he mentioned was, "John, like this person could die." And I said, "Okay, Doc, what I'm hearing is you don't hate the people in the room." "No, I don't hate anybody, but they felt hate." "Yeah, well, okay. I just don't want that effing person to die."
Yep.
And I said, "Is there anything wrong with that?" "Mm-mm." I said, "No, there's nothing wrong with you not wanting someone to die. That's actually beautiful and good. So let's consider a better way, right?" And sometime an F-bomb is very appropriate. It's like, "Hey, I need this done now."
Yep.
It's very appropriate, but maybe not all the time. And so, so let's build them up too. Let's work on both of those pieces. And then I went to administration, who was, really their tail feathers were all in this ruffle. And I said, "Look, like the only desire that this doc has is to save this person on the table. They love that person and want to help that person. And if things are going on in the room that are inhibiting that process, then yeah, things go flying in the room, and it is, and we're going to work on those things." But you understand that the core value is not this is an evil doctor. This is a good doctor who cares about people. His just expression of those emotions is kind of poor. And it's not unlike any time that we start throwing scalpels across the room at people because we're having a hard time processing something and we're upset about it. But what's deeper than that is we love these people and we're afraid. Often anger for me is fear, and I have to like roll it back.
Yep.
It's not because of all these things. It's because I'm afraid that this thing isn't going to work out. So can we get past that space and look at that and say, it's okay to feel anger, and then recognize it as fear, and then process it through, and then express exactly what is going on.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a little bit frustrated right now. The reason why, took me like 3 steps to figure this out, because I had to figure out that the first thing why was not actually why. It was like the third thing. And that is because I'm afraid that these people won't be able to attend this conference that we've worked really hard to set up. And I love this conference and I love this message, and I'm a believer and I want this to move forward. And so that made my approach so much less sharp and so much more appropriate to that person that I was communicating with.
Isn't that amazing that you found the deepest reason why, and it became your passion? That's what it was. You're passionate about this. Mm-hmm. Same with that doctor. He's passionate about saving this person's life, improving their health. And I think that's where most of our emotions start, is where we're passionate. Mm. And if we can get to that part of the passion, like what layer is that at? Maybe it's 4 or 5 layers deep, but we'll see why that emotion's showing up. Mm. And not all emotions are bad. Anger's not a bad emotion. There are times where you need to be able to express in a way. Now, the expression and the manifestation of your anger can be harmful, but anger itself is not necessarily bad. Because looking at my life, looking at some clients' lives, if you've been abused, you need that trigger to say, I'm going to recognize when I'm getting abused again. Yeah. And so if I get angry, then you can go into those layers and be like, why am I angry? Why am I getting anger? Because this person's going to abuse me again, psychologically, physically, whatever it is, spiritually. And then you can say, oh, I am justified in this anger. And I'm not going to use the anger. I'm not going to manifest it and be angry, but I know the emotion. So being able to progress that and make light of the situation and bring light to the situation and say, I'm a human who has this. I'm a human who feels anger. I'm a human who feels grief, sadness. That's okay. How I manifest it might not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like you're saying, throwing scalpels, that's going to hurt people.
Yeah.
And we do it all the time in life. Our words are scalpels, right? And so if we start to say that that emotion is valid, maybe the manifestation of it's not. And that's okay. But that's not my place to say that for other people because I don't know their trauma. For me, physically harming people is never going to be an answer, and I know that. But if I was being, if I'm a client of mine who's being physically harmed, they might have to throw a punch back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't know their circumstance when it comes to how they manifest that emotion, but the emotion itself is okay.
And manifesting that emotion, that's my point, is that often the very first instinctual manifestation of that emotion is not good. It's often destructive instead of constructive. Yep. So being able to regulate just a little bit and just being able to say, whoa, I'm having really strong emotions and really strong impulses to punch everybody in the room in the face. I don't have this. That makes me sound like I'm an angry guy all the time. I'm super not. I'm totally chill. But I'm passionate about certain things.
Yeah.
And like, son, you got to clean your room. Like, this is important. But I'm not like over the top about it, mostly. But that first instinct that we have is not the true emotion that we're having or reason for that emotion that we're having. So if we can just recognize it, that the actions that these emotions are driving initially might not be appropriate. They're too sharp. It's too much of a scalpel. Pause on that. Just pause. And then roll that back to say, oh, it's because of XYZ, these things. And then think through that and say, is that true? Because all of those thought processes are creating that negative scalpel throwing thing.
Right.
Think back one more layer deep. No, it's not because everybody in the room is incompetent and jerks and they're all trying to kill this patient. It's because you love the patient and you're trying to help the patient. And that's it.
Yeah.
And if you just express that, hey guys, I really care about this person. And if we don't get this done in the next 1 minute, she's going to die. So let's work. Okay. Let's get to work. Yeah. Like that's maybe a little bit more effective than throwing a scalpel and dropping 3 F-bombs and telling everybody they're incompetent jerks. Right.
Right. And instinct is different than intention, right? And intuition. We do instinctually do things, but if we can intentionally do things, if we can use intuition on doing things, then our natural response, our quickest response, doesn't even play anymore. Yeah. We don't even have to stay at the surface. We can go deeper, quicker. And so if you can be insightful and you can have intuition and then you can set intention, you don't have to respond or react in a moment with, I'm going to throw the scalpel, I'm going to drop the F-bomb. It's like, now I'm going to be insightful at this is the situation. I'm going to explain it now instead of I'm going to yell. Now I'm going to use my intention to say, hey, I am intentionally doing this process and it's because I want to save this person's life. Mm. And then people in the room also gain respect from them, right? Because they see, oh, this person didn't have a instinctual response. They had an intentional response. They care about this person. And you can avoid all of the post-surgery care that you had to do with the team, I'm sure, and the doctor to explain, hey, he really cares about people. He could have done that in the moment, right? Mm-hmm. If he didn't do instinct and he did intuition, or if he didn't do instinct and he did intention, it would have changed the whole room, it would change the whole setting. And I think that applies to so many things in our life. On the road, when we're driving, we go off instinct. But if we think, I'm going to go with intention, this is a silly example, but I'm going to give it. But if I know I have to get off on the freeway in 3 exits, I'm going to intentionally start merging, right? But if I'm not paying attention and all of a sudden that exit's there, instinct is like, I'm going to cut 4 people off. So if we're intentional, then all of a sudden we don't have to live on that surface level of reactions. We can be prepared. And it's like we said, it's preventative mental health. Preventative care. If you can find a way to be intentional and pay attention intuitively, then that's preventative. That's getting off the exit gradually. You don't have to do it right then instinctively. And it's pretty powerful when you do it. And I've worked with clients and I've helped them get there where they no longer instinctually react a certain way to their spouse coming home from work. They no longer instinctively react to their child who drops a piece of, food on the floor or breaks a glass. Instead, they can be intuitive enough to say, okay, maybe I'll place that glass on the table a little further. Maybe I, give them a different thing. So you start eliminating the potential emotional reactions as well. If you're if you are an intentional person and you use intuition, you can start eliminating all of the potential negative reactions you're going to have. That's why I think it's important for preventative stuff, preventative mental health.
Yeah. Deliberate, intentional connections are the balm that creates friendships, that heals wounds, that allows people the space to talk things through. So both on the preventative side for your own mental health, but also on the preventative side for other people's mental health.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, some of the keys to that non-judgmental, kind friendship piece. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today and speaking. I value your friendship. I value your journey. I want you to know that I appreciate you sharing your vulnerable spaces today and your wisdom in your journey and your, what did you call it? Qualifications instead of credentials. I think you're more than qualified to discuss these spaces. The waters that you have waded through are deeper and darker than a lot of waters that most folks have. And I think it's beautiful to share that so that other folks can wade through some of that stuff. Yeah. Do you have anything in closing before we close up?
Yeah. Well, obviously, thank you. I respect so much about you. I remember our first time ever playing pickleball. And so I want to just say I respect where your journey has gone.
I'm less of a dick at pickleball too.
Well, I haven't played for a while, so I wouldn't know. But I just want to kind of in closing say if we as people can be more intention in our conversations, intention in how we handle situations, we'll open up so many more people emotionally to healing and to wellness. And it will change the world around us. It'll change our homes. It'll change our relationships and just allowing others to exist. Please just allow others to exist because everyone's going to go through something hard and everyone's going to make mistakes. And if you just allow them to exist and then be intentional about loving them, it's going to work out. Everything will work out. So that's kind of the point there, is just everything will work out. And I've seen it in my life. I know it personally and I know it professionally. If you allow things to work out and you just listen and you love each other, it takes care of itself.
Beautiful wisdom. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I hope you guys learned something at the Voyage Cleanest podcast, and like and subscribe, do all the things and share it with your friends and whatnot. Yeah. Thanks.